got this header welded out. I got the V-band on it. Came out really, really nice. Had that back purge going in it. You can see where the weld did come through. There's no sugaring. There's a nice weld on the back side. So now I'm gonna get this back on the car, mounted again with the gasket, bolted back on. I'm gonna start getting the kit planned out from the passenger side header to the T6 mount on the turbo. I think I might have changed what my plan was just to lengthen up the passenger side one a little bit. I'm probably gonna go to the far side of the T6 mount. I'm gonna make sure that when I do it, I do have enough room because I do need to get the driver's side pipe through there. I'm probably gonna bring it underneath and into the bottom of it, but I'll show you the process on that as well. As I mentioned before, during the mock-up process, try to use all of your gaskets that you're going to use on final installation. Just want to guarantee that when you're done with this setup and everything's fully welded out, that it's still going to fit. Snug all your bolts up. You don't have to bear down on these. You really just want to make sure that you can press the gasket. So the number one thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm planning out my turbo kits, when I'm building the hot side, I try to keep fluid dynamics in mind. If you kind of picture what it's like for water running through a hose, the straighter the hose, the faster the water is going to run through it. If you kink the hose, if you bend the hose too much, the water's obviously going to slow down. Same thing with air. So I try, if I don't have to use a pie cut, I definitely want to try to use one of these bends. This is kind of the tightest centerline radius that I like to use. I believe this is on a 2 or 2.5 inch centerline radius. Obviously, I can make a tighter bend with pie cuts, but again, the tighter you make this bend, the more the air is going to slow down through it. You're going to pick up some speed with velocity coming out of the other side, but if you kink it, it's just going to slow it down. It's the same principle with like mandrel bent tubing for exhaust versus like a crink bent tube that you would get from like a parts store. The smoother the bend radius, the more air, faster the air you're going to get through it. So where this header comes out right now, trying to get this into here with the bends that I have at hand is probably going to be pretty difficult. I think I might have a better shot at bringing this header pipe into this side, but I also have to keep in mind that I have to get, if I do, that I have to get from the other side of the turbo foot over to this manifold with the room that I have allotted. So if I do wind up planning on running from this side to the other, I need to either come out and underneath of this side, which I'm kind of limited on space, or I could come out and over and bring it under here. I really want to keep a lot of room and keep it tidy under the hood here. I do also have to keep in mind that I have to fit accessories like an alternator on this car. He's not doing power steering. Not sure if we're going to do an electric water pump or not yet. Electric water pump would make it a little bit easier. It'd give us a little bit more space on the front of the motor. It just really depends on what I want to do with the setup. Electric water pumps, they work very well as long as you get a really good setup. I usually like to use the Davies Craig pump. I think it's an EMP 150. A lot of guys run them on their air-to-water setups as well. I've used them on a couple cars as regular water pumps. They work very well. The big thing is you just have to make sure that the thing's always on. The car's going to have a dominator in it most likely, so turning on a water pump isn't going to be a big deal. We can just use one of the outputs on the dominator to do that. I could always turn it on once it sees ignition, turn it on once it sees RPM, certain coolant temperature. I'm going to just take a couple measurements, see where we're at. We know we need at least 90 degrees coming out of there to come to the turbo foot. Also, the turbo mount is on an angle as well. I'm going to measure that angle and kind of get a rough idea and see what I want to come down as well. That way we can tie everything together. So just a quick mock-up, I figured I'm going to need this tight radius, 2.5, right off the header anyway. So I'm going to take this piece, tack it to our male side V-band flange. Just a couple little tacks just in case I have to break them loose and plan it out different. Again, as I reiterate, I'm going to clean these parts with acetone really well before I weld them. Just want to try to keep everything as clean as possible. On my tacks, I am not back purging. Make sure you get your groove nice and clean. That's where the weld's going to be in. Whole part, inside, outside. I'm going to wipe down my filler again just to be sure in case I need a little bit. Just a couple of really light tacks. Like I said, if this piece doesn't work out, I want to be able to get this back apart pretty easily. With tacks this light, you can usually just take a pretty small hammer and just tap it both sides of the V-band. It'll knock it right off. I have my digital angle finder on the foot of the turbo flange. That way I can get a good idea of what angle that's at, and I can cut that angle out of my pipe. Basically, that'll give me a good reference point of where I need to get the pipe to be at a 0 degree, and I'll figure out on my bottom flange as well where I need to get that to be 0. That way I can connect both sides. So we are at 43.1 degrees on that flange. It's pretty close to 45. I'll probably take my long centerline radius pipe and cut that at a 45 degree angle. That'll get me pretty close to 0. I can always adjust it. I can cut a little bit more out. It's easier to take more metal away than it is to put metal back into it. So I'm just going to start with that process and see how close that gets me. The way I'm going to find my 45 degree angle here is I have my square. Obviously we have 45 right here. The square and the piece are squared up to my weld table. I just have to mark right through the middle there where that cut is on both sides. I'll probably use a hose clamp or a zip tie, make my line all the way around and cut it with my bandsaw. I'm really not mad with just eyeballing this angle up. I mean, it's going to get us really close. Being that our angle in the car is off by a degree or two anyway from 45, I think this will work out just fine. I wound up making a couple more small cuts out of another long radius 2.5 inch bend. I was really close with my first cut. I kind of clocked it in a different position to where I could see if I got about another 40 degrees out of another bend that I could get kind of in the area that I wanted to. So I wound up cutting one of those a little bit off the center, probably closer to 38, 40 degrees. Kind of got everything in here, lined it all up. I'm pretty much all tacked up from the bottom of this header to the bottom of the turbo foot. Now, my fitment isn't perfect against the turbo foot here. It does need to clock down just a touch more. What I'm going to wind up doing is I'm going to wind up welding this joint first and this joint second. I'm pretty much expecting this thing to shrink with the heat once I get welding on it. If it shrinks, it looks like it's going to pop right down into where I want it to. I do still have a little bit of play between the header and where it's mounted on the car, where the turbo foot's bolted in. Not really too worried about that little bit of gap right now, once I get this fully welded out, I think it's just gonna fit a lot better. So got a little carried away, got the passenger side completely welded up. Once I got it tacked up where I liked it, welded out those bottom two, test fitted it again. It was pretty close. I just wound up welding the whole thing. The heat did pull it a little bit. It didn't really line it up exactly as well as I wanted it to. Not a big deal. I just pulled the piece back out, ran it on my belt sander to get the right angle, pulled about a 1/4 inch back out of it, and then welded a piece of straight 1/4 inch back into it. That way I could get it, made it up to the flange, pretty much perfect. Got everything welded to the flange. So the passenger side, short of having a wastegate put on it, is pretty much done. I think it turned out really well. Everything fits really nice. The V-band pretty much snaps right into where it should. The mount bolts right back up to the mounts that I made in the frame. The header bolts right back on. Everything's still good and lined up. Not hard to put on at all. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start on the driver's side for the crossover. And I'm actually gonna do this side a little bit backwards. I wanna make sure that I clear the passenger side runner that I already made with plenty of room to get the V-band in and out, while also keeping in mind that I have to fit a wastegate and an alternator in the car. I have a feeling we're gonna wind up in this area with the alternator. ICT makes a really nice bracket to mount that with a tensioner on the driver's side. That way you still have a good way to tension it. Probably still gonna need to run a water pump with that setup, which we have plenty of room to do. I still think I'm gonna wind up switching the accessory drive out for a Corvette or F-body style, just to get a couple more inches of room on the front of the motor. It's gonna make it a lot easier to fit stuff. I already started working on the passenger side. This piece is gonna come off of the foot of the turbo. It's gonna mount like this, basically bend right around the V-band, and then I can go under the balancer towards the oil pan and then get back over to my driver's side. I am still waiting on a flex bellow from Ace Race. I forgot to order it in the first order, so I'm gonna have to wait for that to come in to finish it off completely. But this piece is pretty much gonna go right here. We have plenty of room to service the other V-band. It'll come right in and out. So I'm gonna fully weld this piece out now. That way I can get all my shrinkage and everything figured out. Get it pretty much lined up, probably tack it to the turbo flange, and then get a good idea where I have to go from there. I welded out the pipe that goes into the other side of the inlet flange for the turbo. Got everything tacked up to the flange itself where it needed to be. Now I just need to finish building out at least to probably under the balancer. I'm still waiting for that flex pipe, so kind of at a standstill until that comes. I will wind up cutting the flange and welding on the driver's side header as well tonight. But it's all fitting pretty well. It gives us just enough room to get that V-band off underneath. It's gonna be nice and tidy. Everything's gonna be clean on this side of the car. The other pipe's gonna run under, so once everything's dressed out, you're really not gonna see too much except for what's going on over here. I do also have wastegate merges coming from Motion and wastegates coming from Elevated Automotive. I try to grab a lot of parts that I can from Elevated Automotive. Jeremy and Don, great guys, based out of Florida. Jeremy's killer with the parts sales. He's super responsive. He takes care of me on a lot of stuff. He did used to have a shop down here, so him and I are pretty close. If you have a Corvette or a GM LS-based car in Florida, he does a lot of the same things that I do when it comes to tuning and stuff like that. He does a lot of performance work on Corvettes, Camaros, trucks. he's the go-to guy. So if you're in Orlando area, definitely look up Elevated Automotive. He'll get you taken care of. If you're anywhere else in the country and you need parts, definitely hit Jeremy up. I'll leave a link to his shop's Facebook page and his website in the description of this video. I'm gonna go ahead and get this driver's side header welded out now. That way I can get it in the car and I'll get a much better idea of where I need to start making my pipe to run underneath of the motor. Okay, so got this other piece welded out, mounted up. As you can see, we got really good clearance down here. Pretty much bringing this to be below the pan rail. I want to keep it kind of clear of the balancer. That way if we move it in, we got plenty of room to do that. So I did get the Ace Race Flex Bellow in. These are super nice pieces. I've used some other ones in the past. There's a lot of these on Amazon that are pretty poor quality. These Ace Race ones are really nice. You'll see a lot of conflicting argument whether you should run one of these or a double slip joint or nothing at all. I like to have them. I know that the turbo kit and the headers and all of that stuff doesn't move side to side in the car, but there is still a lot of heat expansion, especially, you know, you start making a lot of power, timing gets low, you're gonna start glowing these things red. Everything expands and contracts under heat. So for me, it's good measure. It's gonna make it a lot easier to work on the car, especially when you're putting the turbo kit back together. You know, you can bolt in your turbo mount up there, and then this side will have a little bit of play to get back to the V-band on this side. I'm gonna start mocking this up. I'm thinking about whether I wanna put the flex bellow right off of this bend. Probably not. I'll probably 45 out of this and then 90 to come and match the angle of this guy down here. And then I'll probably put the flex bellow on this side. There's a little bit more room over here. It'll just keep it a little bit more neat and tidy. So I'm gonna start cutting stuff up now. So I still have the protective plastic on this pipe. Like I said, I like to cut it with it on here. It'll just keep the guard from the bandsaw from tearing the pipe up or the vise from tearing the pipe up while I'm cutting it. So quick measurement on the car, I needed about 8.5 inches. So I'm gonna mark my pipe out to 8.5 inches. So with my pipe marked out at 8.5 inches, in order to make a nice straight cut line, I like to use just a junk hose clamp. We'll slide the hose clamp over the pipe, line your mark up with either your front or back edge, whatever side's easier for you to get to. I'll line it up with this edge here. And then once you tighten this up, it's just gonna naturally wanna straighten itself out around the pipe. And then you can use your Sharpie or whatever you're using to mark the pipe to give yourself a nice straight cut line. Now obviously it's gonna step out here if you draw it around. You can always save that piece for last. If you cut 90% around the way of the pipe, when you get to this piece, you can pretty much just eyeball it. I'm gonna clean my cut up on my belt sander anyway. This has a nice flat surface on it. That way we know we have a nice true flat surface to weld to. Another really good way to make sure that your cut stays straight is only cut the pipe 1/4 to 1/3 of the way through at a time. If you just try to run this cut all the way through, there's no way you're going to be able to keep it close to straight. The blade wants to wander in either direction. So, you know, you'll make a cut, you can turn your pipe, make a cut, turn your pipe, make a cut, and then when you're done, you're more likely to have a straighter cut than if you were to just try to cut straight through. So now we have our cut done. I'm gonna take the coating off now, and I'm gonna run this edge on my belt sander to make sure this surface is perfectly flat. If you can see, if I wouldn't have had this plastic liner on here, all these scratches that would have been in the plastic liner would be in the pipe, and you pretty much can't get them out once you do that. Now with the liner off, you can see this pipe is just like brand new. I'm gonna go ahead and sand this surface flat now. An easy way to tell if you have a flat surface is when you're done on your belt sander. If the grain of the direction that it was sanding is all the same and flat, and you don't have any areas where it's shinier or duller, then you know that this surface is flat. I also like, when I'm finished sanding it out, to bevel the edge a little bit, just on the edge. That way when I weld it, I have two beveled edges. I got more area to fill with weld. Just makes for a stronger weld and better penetration. Just as usual, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this piece up now with acetone. That way, if I mock it up and it fits, I can just go ahead and start welding on it. I don't have to worry about fitting it and then cleaning it and then trying to make sure that it fits again in the same spot. I'm also going to go ahead and clean my flex bellow out really well, because again, if I mock this up and I know that it fits where I want it to, I'm just gonna start tacking it up and make it ready to weld. You can see brand new pieces, clean out of the wrapper, still very dirty. Now, another good tip that I've learned in the past when cleaning stuff with acetone. So use a brand new towel every time you're on a new piece. And even if you need a little bit more, the best thing to do, never take your rag and touch the spout of your acetone directly, because if you take this and touch it and then flip it upside down to pour it, you're basically contaminating all of your acetone that's still in here with whatever dirt is on your rag. You just want to pour it straight to the rag, and that way you're not contaminating the rest of your acetone. Something else I forget to do more times than not is have the Sharpie on me in my pocket. Usually in my pocket, because what I'll do is I'll get the piece in here, get everything lined up how I wanted it, make sure that it fits the way that I wanted it, and then I don't have the Sharpie in my pocket to make a mark of how I want it clocked. And then I have to take it out, find a Sharpie, come back, reline it back up, and then make my mark. So now that I have this piece marked where I know I want it, the other thing is, right now I just have this flex bellow choked up on here. I have it bottomed out. There is a groove on the inside. Same on this side. There's a groove basically that you know is even. I know my cut is straight. I'm using this factory edge of the pipe that I know is also straight against the factory edge of the 90-degree pipe that's under the hood. That way I know that the angle that my pipe is on is going to be the same angle that this pipe is on, which I've already zeroed out. So I'm going to tack my flex bellow on first, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull the rest out of the car, and then I'm going to tack this to my 90. When I start a new day of welding, I like to pull my tungsten out of the torch. It's pretty easy to forget what the last thing you did with it is, whether it still looks good or not. You might have some contamination on it, especially from sitting. I got this nice tungsten grinder from Eastwood. It makes sharpening tungstens a breeze. Plus, you know you're not going to contaminate your tungsten if you have a dedicated tungsten grinder, because the only thing that this thing is ever ground is tungsten. So the tungsten grinder is pretty easy to use. You know, on-off switch, speed adjustment. I just run it on speed 3. And then you have 4 different grooves up here. 2 of the grooves are for 3/32, and 2 of the grooves are for 1/16. I use a 3/32 prime weld laser tungsten for pretty much everything that I do. And then, being that this is stainless, I'm going to use the flatter. Let's see if we can focus. I'm going to use the flatter of the 2 angles. Just seems to do better on my stainless welding when it's flatter like that. And then you just pretty much turn it on, you put it in here, you flatten it out in the groove, and then you slowly twist to get your new grind. So just like before, just put 3 small tacks on here, no filler. Again, just in case I got to pull this thing back apart, leaving these tiny little tacks on here makes it a lot easier versus if you you know, put some weld or some filler in there and you got to grind it and cut it back out. It's never going to look right after that. So I got this piece tacked up. I put 3 small tacks on it. It's pretty much all we need to hold it solid. But as you can see, we have really nice fit up here. It's pretty level, looks really good, fits nice and tight. Gives us just enough room to the bottom of the balancer, just enough room in here in the oil pan. Got my flex bellow tacked in. So now I just need to get from here to there, and it looks like a pretty easy run. I'm gonna need to obviously 90 out of here to get in the right direction of that, and I think that's gonna need a 45 as well, but I think it's gonna wrap up pretty easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on that. Well, I got the driver's side laid out. I wound up needing another 90-degree bend. I was short one from Ace Race, which was fine because I needed a long radius anyway. Longer radius than I had ordered from Ace Race. I did have a vibrant one that I had extra from another project. I don't like the quality as much. The finish on the product isn't nearly as nice as the Ace Race stuff is. So I wound up taking a red Scotch-Brite pad. It's like an 800 grit prep pad, and basically gave it a new surface finish, cleaned it up. And then coming off of the header, I knew I needed about 25 degrees to come meet that pipe. Instead of cutting another radius pipe, when I checked the radius that I needed, it was pretty small. So I wound up cutting 2 small pieces of pie out of my straight pipe, and basically everything lined right up. This is my new piece. Right now, the fit up is so good that basically it's just sitting inside of my flex bellow, and I don't even have the clamp onto this side yet. It's just tacked up for now. I do want to weld this piece completely out before welding it to this. That way, when I weld this straight joint and this straight joint, since I know it's not going to shrink up too much, being that it's a straight pipe, I know it'll all fit when I'm finished. So if I weld this one first and it does shrink, I can make the changes that I need to that pipe before it's all completely welded to this. But like I said, I mean, the fit up's really good. It's basically snapped together there. I mean, it snaps right into place, which is perfect. That way I know when I tighten everything up, I know the V-band's gonna line up and everything's gonna seal up and fit really well. So now I'm gonna pull this piece out, put it on the bench, get it welded out. I'm gonna test fit it again, make sure everything's straight, and then I'm gonna go ahead and weld this piece out completely. And basically, short of wastegates, the hot side will be done. Okay, I got this pipe fully welded out for the driver's side. Came out really nice. Welds just keep getting better and better on this deal. Pretty much all I have to do now is 3 welds. I need to weld both sides of the flex bellow, and then the final weld to the elbow that goes back up to the turbo foot. We didn't really get any shrinkage at all. Once I got this piece done, I just snapped it right back up into place. Still no clamp on it. It just pretty much clips right in to the header. Still fits straight into my flex bellow. So we're basically 3 welds away. I'm gonna pull this pipe back out of here real quick before I weld it. I do wanna show you something about these flex bellows from Ace Race and for most flex bellows. The same goes for like a double slip. These bellows are directional. So the way that they're built inside for back pressure, I welded it on backwards. I'll be the first to admit that I make mistakes. These flex bellows are directional. This is the main reason why I don't fully weld something out until I'm ready to fully weld everything after I've checked all of my fitment and everything. So, like a double slip, these bellows here are directional. There is a lip in here, just like a double slip, that you want to be basically opposite of how I had it. If the exhaust flow is coming from this way and going into the bellow on this side, there's a smooth radius on that side, and then this larger diameter slips inside of that. So I put this one on backwards. Again, this is the reason why I tack everything on first. I'm glad that I caught it now instead of fully welding this side out, because that would have been a much bigger problem. I would have had to basically cut it off. I do have a backup one. I always order two pretty much of everything just in case I do have an issue. So I'm gonna take my hammer, I'm gonna break these tacks loose, I'm gonna flip it around 180 degrees, weld it back on, check my fitment one more time, and then I'm gonna weld all this stuff out. We're gonna be finished. Well, we got it fully welded out. Really happy with how this turned out. This is probably one of my most favorite hot sides that I've done yet. Everything laid out really nice. The bends are really nice. The welds came out really nice. Again, I'm an amateur welder. I didn't go to school for any of this. I'm kind of mostly self-taught. There was a lot of YouTube channels that I followed in the past. A lot of influencers when I was in my late teens, early 20s, before I ever even thought about picking up a TIG welder. Companies like Toxic Fab, guys on YouTube like Welding Tips and Tricks, the Fabrication series. I watched these videos for hours and hours, always wanted to do it. Finally bought a TIG welder, picked it up. I want to give most of the credit to really good fabrication materials. There's a pretty large difference between materials off of Amazon that are from China that aren't true 304, that aren't true 16 gauge thickness. When you buy good material, it really shows in your work. Really good fit up, keeping everything really nice and clean. It really makes a world of difference. Again, super happy with how this kit came out. I really hope the customer likes it. We are fully welded up. I'm basically just waiting on the wastegate merges and the wastegates to get here. I believe the wastegates will be here today. Once I get all that stuff in, I can figure out my best gate placement. I'll walk you guys through that too. I'll show you where the best places to put those are for priority. But, I mean, I cannot be mad with this at all. All of my penetration's really nice. The welds are really uniform for doing everything freehand. I don't have a positioner or anything. I would like to get a positioner at some point. I do know, and from what I've seen, positioners really increase your consistency. Getting out of position and doing some of these welds can be a little bit tricky. I really want it all to look uniform, so you just really got to take your time. I also have learned over my years, as soon as you get uncomfortable while you're welding, that's where you're going to start to mess up. So the second I get uncomfortable, I just stop. You back out of the pedal, take a couple deep breaths, reposition, start your weld back up. I try to keep all my dab paths the same. If I run 13 dabs, I'll stop, make my next run at 13, the following run at 13. Again, without a positioner, you got to do a lot of stuff like that. You can't really weld all the way around the pipe if it's sitting on the table because you can't get to most of the pipe. So I do highly encourage anybody that's ever thought about doing anything like this, just go out and do it. You'll never learn if you don't do it. It does seem like a big thing to just jump into. It's not the cheapest thing to get into. I use a prime weld TIG 220. I've had this machine for like 4 years now. It's pretty much all I've used at the shop. I don't put a cover on it. I don't have a cover on my TIG lead. I probably should. The machine's probably absolutely destroyed inside, but it has never skipped a beat. I'm probably going to pick up their 325 next with a water-cooled torch. I don't really run a whole lot of amps. Sometimes when I get into the thicker aluminum, I could definitely notice the difference of where I could use a water cooler, but I ran pretty much 50 amps on this entire setup. 50 amps, the torch doesn't even get hot. You can pretty much run it all day, no issues. But I'm gonna go ahead and bolt this thing back into the car and show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so I got the turbo kit bolted back on. I'm really happy with how this thing turned out. I couldn't be any happier with how it did. The fitment is phenomenal. Everything just kind of fell right back into place where it was. The mounts on the frame, the headers, the V-bands, everything just fell into place. Super uniform. There's a ton of space pretty much to work on whatever you need to work on. The kit comes in and out of the car really easy. You know, you pull the turbo off, unbolt both of the V-bands, and then take your mount bolts out, and it'll come right up out of the car. It'll fit out of the top or out of the bottom. I mean, there's really nowhere where it's super close to anything, but it's also not super far away. It doesn't hang lower than anything underneath of the car. You can see it's got really good fitment. It's nice and level. It's aesthetically pleasing when you look at everything under the car. You have the steering rack and the subframe and the turbo kit are all at the same angle. There's not a whole bunch of weird stuff going on. Next time you guys see this car, I'll be putting wastegates on it. I think I'm gonna do the brake lines this weekend as well. Not sure if I'm gonna take a video on that yet. Probably will. Give you a really good idea how to lay that stuff out. Again, I'm super happy with how this turned out. If you guys wanna see more cool content like this, please follow, subscribe, leave a comment if there's anything that you guys wanna see more in detail or less in detail. I'm still very new at this, so I really wanna work the bugs out and make the best content for you guys. Just wanna bring you along for the ride here at my shop. But that's it for now. We'll see you guys on the next one.